The Fulbright year in Paris saved me. I could live for free, also get a monthly stipend. My flights were all covered. Groupmuse is a house concert community. To have musicians come to your home and share their music and their enthusiasm. If anyone is saying to themselves, I don't know if I can do performing day in and day out, I may have to think about something else that could pay some of the bills or all of the bills, arts administration is probably the most gratifying thing for me.
Mosa, thank you so much for being here. It's great to have you.
Thanks, John Henry, for having me.
We know each other as cellists, first and foremost. We studied at Juilliard together. We're in the same studio with Joel Krosnick. But I don't know a whole lot about the pre- and post-Juilliard Mosa, and I'm very curious to talk to you today about what you are doing now, of course, these days, but also some of the things that you were doing beforehand and after that you were doing your master's, because you studied some things that were very related to music at UC Berkeley, and also you were awarded a Fulbright scholarship after Juilliard, which I want to go into a little bit. But could you tell us a little bit about what it was that you were studying at UC Berkeley and how that tied into your musical life?
Yeah, happy to. It feels like an age ago, but all throughout my childhood, high school and then into college, I was that person who loved cello, but my parents didn't really hope for me to have a career as a cellist. They knew the trials and tribulations of trying to live as an artist. I don't know if it's fair to say that I might be one of our family's first professional artists in generations. And so I'm really grateful to my parents for giving me that opportunity before high school to have studied music seriously. It was a time commitment, as you all know. And however, I got to college, I was undeclared as a major. I arrived as a freshman, I don't know what to do. I started taking a bunch of classes that fall semester because I had to. And then in the spring, I thought, you know what? Some way to find my direction may be to just sign up and audition for the orchestra here. I know music. I know I love playing cello, and I'm sure I'll meet some friends there. I didn't want to go into a sorority. This might be my best chance at socializing with other like-minded folks. So I auditioned, got in, and they said, actually, you could get subsidized lessons if you became a music major.
Oh.
What? Well, I'd love to take advantage of that. Sign me up. So I think maybe that week I marched into the music department and said I'd like to be a music major. And then funnily, I did actually find clarity in my life at that point, and I realized environmental science was something that had followed me unknowingly, but always there. My mother taught me the importance of composting. I was so embarrassed after school when she would drive and pick us up, and she would drive to the Starbucks near home. And then she'd say, hey, can you go inside and pick up, ask them for their used coffee grounds. I want to put them around our rose bushes at home. She had gotten clippings from friends and was planting them. And I thought, Mom, what if my friends see me? This is not my ideal way of spending time. But the beauty of composting is actually from chaos, from waste comes this beautiful, fruitful, colorful product.
That is very beautiful. Yeah.
And I feel like in many ways I find that metaphor as something that it has sustained me anytime in music something has happened, to let me see the chaos, to let me see something not so beautiful. And so maybe that's the theme here. I loved silence as a result, because silence is the absence of chaos, or it can amplify chaos.
That's true. I never thought of it that way.
So that seemed to be the one tethering, overlapping space between music and environmental science. Noise pollution. Thinking about your environment in terms of its sounds. We live in New York.
Yeah.
Is there ever a time when we don't have pollution?
We might even notice a little noise pollution on this podcast.
Exactly.
That's very interesting. And I've never thought of the way you put it before, silence, the way you put it before, which is that I always think of silence as, it's the absence of sound, or it's stillness or something. But the absence of chaos kind of brings it to another level because so much of what we experience in New York City, but also just in life, is like chaos, sound, noise that we try to tune out. And so silence as the opposite of chaos, it's not just sonically, it's also like lack of all this activity, this buzz that's going on. That's really interesting. The role of silence in life is important, but also in music. And I'm curious, I think you wrote your thesis, or you wrote a paper, a graduate thesis, is that what it was?
Yeah,
on silence and music?
Yeah, it was kind of like an honors thesis as an undergrad, and it was an opportunity to just kind of pretend I was a researcher, without really diving into academia at the time. I wrote about where silence can be found, and I chose 3 different works. Our lovely friend cellists, J.S. Bach, in one of the suites there, and a piece by Hans Werner Henze. And then, of course, the piece that I was really deeply in love with, which was John Cage's 4:33. 4 minutes and 33 seconds of so-called sonic silence. The musician on stage is not playing a note. But I may have to retract the statement that I just put out there, which is that silence could be the absence of chaos, because silence is actually infinite definition concept. And that was what I ended up having to say, I think, in that honors thesis, because I left a couple pages blank at the end.
Okay.
As a
textual
nod to silence.
Oh, I like that. Wow, that's very clever.
Because, everyone will have their own subjective experience of silence. And in a way, I had my first, let's say, existential question. If I wanted to pursue silence, did I need to pursue life in a convent? Did I need to actually pursue life as not a musician? Because at the time I was exploring with this idea with, is the ultimate musician silent?
Interesting.
So that got me into a bit of a quandary.
Yeah.
I got out of it somehow, but and that's why I did my master's at Juilliard.
Very nice. Well, I'm glad you did get out of that quandary. The 4:33 is an interesting piece because I think, if I understand, I've never performed it myself, but if I understand correctly, anyone can play it or not play it. Rather. But it's also, I imagine each performance is completely different, because part of the effect or the experience is to notice what's going on around you. Is that right?
Exactly. And this was my experience. I don't want to generalize at all. Some will say the audience, what the audience does and reacts is the music, is the sonic input. Or some might say it's a question of positive and negative space. What was always there in the environment, the buzz of the air conditioning, the hum of the subway above or underground you, those are there, but are you ever quiet enough to hear it? That negative space then is forced into the foreground. And I love that because, when I first moved to New York, I had to actually remember that decision I had made when I was living in Berkeley to always have open ears. We don't have earlids. We can't shut things out as easily. And that is both a dilemma, but also an opportunity to just view the sounds around you differently. And I have to say, when I was playing a lot of new music, a lot of music, some audiences might say are noise. But I think there goes some
noise.
Is it noise? Or is it a beautiful ode to firefighters?
There we go. I actually remember during one of the concerts that you helped organize, it was a massive muse, which I want you to explain what that is in a little bit. And it was so beautiful because the presenter, the host, got up, and I presume this was at your instruction, said to the audience, let's just sit for 30 seconds in silence before this music begins. Because silence not only affects us in the moment of the silence, but I feel like it also primes us to receive music, a conversation differently. And
Yeah, it's interesting. I unfortunately couldn't make it to that concert. I really, really wanted to. You performed beautifully. I know that.
thank you.
And it was such a powerful kind of concert experience for the audience because it was Dvorak Concerto performed by John Henry Crawford in a raw warehouse in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
That was really cool for Groupmuse. So thank you, John Henry, for doing that. To your point about silence serving a really powerful tool preceding something, I really agree. Preceding, after, when after an orchestra plays the final note and there is this aura of sound just dissipating still, and the kind of everyone dares not breathe,
Yeah.
until that some baton drops, right? That's the visual indication that we have now entered the end of a piece. That to me serves like a work of art's frame, right? It really directs us to where we can stop saying that is art.
Sure.
The music,
Sure.
there is music, because to our previous point, I think one way of living is to view all sounds as music and to listen accordingly.
It's a great philosophy. You're also, so this is now post Juilliard, you were a recipient of a Fulbright Award, which is a very prestigious award. I know they only give it to something like 2,000 students across the whole U.S. in all disciplines. So to be one of the musicians selected speaks so much. And I'm curious to know what you studied, where you studied, how long this was, what that whole experience was like for you. Gosh,
I always say that the Fulbright year in Paris saved me.
Did it really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Because it was a beautiful example of funding for artists to do their art. I had never been the recipient of such a scholarship before, where I could live for free, also get a monthly stipend. My flights, my round trip flight to Paris, those were all covered by the scholarship as well. It was beautiful because I had finished my master's with a bit of a feeling of defeat because I didn't set out to do. I set out to do a lot, and I didn't complete everything. I unfortunately had a bit of a playing-related injury. Whether it's playing-related or just simply carrying the cello around and not watching out for my shoulders, it's still undetermined. But I had a real big moment of, I'm not so sure I can be a cellist if I can't depend on my body. But fortunately, what the Fulbright year promised was space and time to figure it out. And
in one of the most beautiful cities on earth.
Exactly. It really was beautiful because it's such a hub of the arts.
Yeah.
Art.
Yeah.
All the musicians there are phenomenal as well. Lots of visual artists, a bustling, DIY art scene. And so the project proposal that I had submitted was thanks to also the then Dean of Academic Affairs at Juilliard, Dean Jose Garcia Leon. He really helped me refine the proposal from a very ambitious project of, I want to explore 3 living composers in Paris and their connections to a good friend of theirs, Anssi Karttunen. He was the Finnish cellist I was studying with in Paris, a phenomenal cellist who is really good friends with the departed Kaija Saariaho.
Who's one of the most influential, up until recently, influential living female composers of this century.
I have to say, she actually inspired me to pursue new music as a potential career because Anssi Karttunen came to Berkeley in my gap year between undergrad and grad school and offered a bit of a question and answer session after his performance of solo works for cello, and described, I've said this maybe to many friends and in many instances, but he said that this technique of really kind of crushing the bow onto the cello so it makes this sound is not too much of something. It's not crushing. It's actually, to Kaya Saariaho, he said, this is her entering into music so deeply that it shatters around you. For me, that was eye-opening, ear-opening, heart-opening. And when I heard that come out of his friendship with a composer like that, I said, I want to study from him. I want to understand how to have such a relationship with composers because it is so intimate.
Yeah. And so much of composition is composer and muse, someone who inspires them, to write, or someone who shows them a new way of playing the instrument that they didn't realize as a composer.
The possibilities.
Yeah.
It really takes that person to say, I will try it.
Yeah.
and he did that for many composers. So I was so lucky to get to study with him. Pandemic hit. I was studying 2019 through 2020. So that was a new experience. But I did spend the rest of the year there and was so grateful to the Fulbright team for making it happen, and was able to present actually a work, all the works for cello and multiple cellos by Betsy Jolas before I left. That was kind of the culmination of my work there. I had the lovely opportunity to just practice for hours on one piece, for months on a few pieces.
That's really important. I mean, to be able to have that time to digest and to absorb the music.
You know how the life of a musician is. You kind of sometimes are juggling.
Here's a new piece. We're playing in 2 weeks.
Yeah. And good luck.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. Well, I'm so glad you're sharing this because I didn't know most of this. And I think it's really an important thing for people to understand how the Fulbright works, and what it is, because I've heard of Fulbright in passing a lot of times, and people recommend, oh, maybe you should look into the Fulbright program. But to hear about what it allows you to do, I think is really important. If there was someone out there who was interested in this, what do you think it was about your application that caught their eye? Was there a big application process? How does that work?
Yeah, it was a big, lengthy application process, and I understand why now, of course, because the year is magical and everyone should do it. I think what Dean Garcia Leon helped me refine, which was super helpful, was write about the project that you cannot do anywhere else in the world with any other teacher in the world. Because sometimes, and I wrote about this perhaps in the application, if I recall, I wrote about the fact that even just being in the environment, being in the city that these living composers live in is enough for a musician who lives in another country, who would like to perform these works as closely as possible to what the composers intend. Yeah. Sometimes just walking the same street, understanding where they go for coffee. I mean, I didn't find that out, but you know what I mean.
You could presume they probably had coffee.
Yeah.
Where you do.
What do they see on their walks with, I don't know if they have a dog. I'd like to find that out. That is enough for me. Yeah. I think just understanding the composers as people rather than a name on a music score, that was really important to me.
So for those who are unfamiliar with Groupmuse, could you tell us a little bit about it? I see you as kind of like the Groupmuse queen. You've been involved for a while now, and you've had different roles in Groupmuse. But what is Groupmuse? Groupmuse
is a house concert community. And it's active in a couple cities. New York is one of the bigger ones, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles. And it's all about bringing live music into your homes. You don't have to be a prince in 18th century Western Europe to have musicians come to your home and share their music and their enthusiasm for performing with you and your friends. And so that's why I started performing these house concerts in my gap year after undergrad and Juilliard. It was actually more for a practical purpose. I was always a few $100s short of making rent. I didn't really have any connections in the area at the time. I didn't go to the conservatory in the area. And so what I thought of was, well, what can I do? I can do house concerts because from age 8, my mom had me host these small little house concerts that we would have at home with all the students of my age, just playing whatever they were learning that week in their lessons, Yeah. And it didn't occur to me until years later that that's what primed me to love house concerts is my dear mom. I love you, Mom. So house concerts, but in the way that audiences can just pay musicians directly. That is so powerful. John Henry, you've played
I've played a number of group
many,
muses.
yeah.
Not as many as you. I've heard you played over 100 group muses.
Yeah, maybe over 120, but I'm not counting.
Gosh, amazing.
But I actually really love these because you can see the people you're performing for. You often are performing for maybe 10, can be 50 if you are in a larger space. You can hear when people gasp when something is unexpected that you do, or when your bow catches, the tendrils of a plant nearby, or you accidentally almost spear someone's face with the flourish.
It's a very intimate environment. Yeah.
And oftentimes people are lying, underneath the piano. So I'm just painting a picture of what a group muse can be.
Yeah.
And I think I could define what a massive muse.
That's a nice term that I like that group muse uses.
Yeah, it's just a larger house concert on the scale of maybe 100 or so attending. And it's usually in a warehouse that volunteers their space for a reduced rate or free even. And, most musicians grapple with the problem of venue rentals are so expensive.
Yeah.
Renting a hall. I mean, you could rent Carnegie Hall for the right price. If I was starting out and I really wanted to share this program that I'm so in love with, and I think others could be too, what do I do if I don't have $3,000? If I only have, enough money to pay some musicians a small amount, I'd rather pay the musicians.
Yeah.
So I think Group Muse addresses a couple things: the musician payment, like I said, and the making more venues accessible to musicians.
And it provides a different concert experience. It's more intimate. Not that one is better than the other, but I think variety is interesting in music. And that is not only within music, but in the venues that you have to choose. So I'm curious to ask you, because you've not only performed over 100 or 120 group muses, but you've been the organizer or the mastermind behind countless group muses as well. And you've had roles not only in Group Muse as an arts administrator, but also at Juilliard, Marlborough Music Festival, International Contemporary Ensemble, many different large musical organizations. And I'm curious, as someone who sat in that role as a musician, what do you wish musicians knew more about behind the scenes? Because a lot of times, when it came to those group muses that I played, someone else was doing most of the work, and I just showed up and played and got to enjoy it. But there's so much more that goes on behind that, and I'm curious to know.
I don't know
what you saw or what you see as from that perspective.
Yeah, I think everything I do behind the scenes as an arts administrator, I don't know if it's cheesy to say, but I really try to do it out of love. Love for the artists who I'm often working with to make sure that their lives are easier, that they can just show up and play. Because it takes a really certain energy and a certain brain mode to learn a piece of music to the point where it's powerful for an audience and it's convincing. If I could do away with the other chaos, the spreadsheets, the payments, the budgeting conversations, renting sheet music, printing out,
so much,
if I can do that for someone else, that to me is the ultimate act
of service.
Yeah.
In a way, yeah.
And that's kind of why I jumped around so much. Fortunately, there were other musicians / art administrators who really took me under their wings and taught me about databases, how important it is to maintain really accurate data and be good at fundraising, build relationships with potential donors, build a community. All of these ingredients are what make music possible. And Group Muse, I think, is another example of where all of my interests just fell
together as one.
Beautifully.
And,
I don't love practicing, I have to say, anymore. Maybe I never did. I love actually interacting with people
Yeah.
around music. I love talking to composers and getting to know them. I love seeing a 7-year-old in the audience come up and say to me, "I want to play the cello. How do I do that?" And so arts administration is, if anyone is saying to themselves, "Gosh, I don't know if I can do performing day in and day out. I may have to think about something else that could pay some of the bills or all of the bills." Arts administration is probably the most gratifying thing for me. I mean, if I can't be playing on stage, and now I don't want to, I want to help others get on stage.
It's interesting you use the term ingredient or ingredients when you're describing the concert organizing process. Is there a formula, having done so many of these, for putting together a concert? I mean, there has to be a framework of steps, finding a venue, the musicians, an audience, what they're going to play. But have you found kind of a groove or a formula for going about it, having done so many of them?
Interesting question. Yeah, you know what? I think there is, and every formula, every recipe is going to depend on what dish you want to cook. Some dishes will be spicy. Some dishes will be about everyone getting a piece easily and not having to carry around.
No one's hungry.
Yeah. Are you cooking for 400 people or are you cooking for 4? So I think for every challenge, every project that I'm in front of, I kind of think about what the priorities are. Let's say that Massive Muse that had Dvorak Cello Concerto performing in a raw space. The logistics were different for that versus another 12 cello Massive Muse that I had the pleasure of organizing for Groupmuse. And do musicians have certain expectations of what they get out of it? Do audiences have certain expectations? After organizing and performing 100 or so house concerts, I can say I know that really well. You have to have a host who likes gathering people. The musicians need to love playing with each other, first of all, as well. And the audiences need to be open-minded. And there are certain ways to coax every player of this scenario to be showing up the most open-minded as possible. So I feel like I've managed to explore that now.
That's a great recipe. So let's say I'm a musician or I want to host a Groupmuse. How would I go about taking part in one, performing or, hosting my own Groupmuse?
Yeah, you'd go to groupmuse.com. Everything is on the website. We like to think that it's very self-running. You just submit an application form if you're a musician. One of our colleagues will review the recording just to make sure that you are a professional musician, kind of honing your craft constantly. Then if you're a host and you want to bring musicians to your home for free, first of all, then you would also submit a host interest form just to get the conversation started. Usually you will have an onboarding that just helps you learn, okay, well, what is different about a Groupmuse house concert versus other house concert models out there? Because we do like to think that it's not just about the music quality, it's also about the experience. Yeah. Everyone coming through the doors gets a warm welcome. No one's feeling left out. The inclusive nature is really important to Groupmuse. If you're an audience member, you can sign up, reserve your seat at one of these events in your city. If you happen to be traveling, sometimes we have Groupmuses pop up in Paris.
Oh, really? In Europe as well? Okay.
Yeah, in Berlin especially, because one of our teammates is out there.
I think when we last worked together on a Groupmuse, I don't think it had gone international at that point. So is this recent?
Yeah, there was always interest. And I wonder if part of me moving to Paris, I really wanted to do Groupmuses out there. Because another beauty of a musician doing a Groupmuse in a city is you get to meet people in that city. when I moved there, I was surrounded by students. My neighbors were all musicians too. It was easy to not really meet someone else doing another kind of work. So Group Muses just kind of, happened, that I organized a few before the pandemic hit. So thankfully that happened. But yeah, hopefully Group Muse will continue going everywhere. Our hope is the model itself will be interesting enough to people in multiple continents.
Well, it's clearly working. And I mean, I even remember at one point in time, I don't know whether this was your own tagline or Group Muse's own tagline or whether someone else attributed it, but they were calling Group Muse the Uber for classical music, which I like that idea that, you can sort of order musicians to your apartment to come play. I mean, I know about the massive muses because I've done a few of them, and then I've also done a few, the cello ensemble one, but also some duet Group Muses.
That's
just
right.
with another cellist. But I'm curious, I know to some degree the scale of the large ones, but how small can they get? Is there like a minimum viable audience?
Yeah,
group
I think maybe
to make a Group Muse happen.
Yeah, maybe just 10, and
Okay.
that's just an arbitrary number that the Group Muse team set at one point.
Okay.
I feel like 10 is a good number. That there's always a little bit of math going on too to make sure that the musicians are walking away with enough payment to make it worth their while.
That's great.
But that I also do some work with Groupmuse Foundation.
Yes, and I want to ask you about that because you're the executive director of the Groupmuse Foundation, which is a sister organization to Groupmuse. What is different about the Groupmuse Foundation to Groupmuse itself?
In 2020, when the pandemic really shook a lot of things for musicians, I remember in my quarantine, because I had gotten sick. Well, we think of COVID. In my quarantine, I really saw all the anxieties, the fears, and the realization that musicians are truly financially vulnerable in an emergency like that. I found myself thinking, gosh, what can I do? What can I do? I am so lucky here in Paris. I still have my housing because it's part of the Fulbright. What if my friends who don't have such a luxury, what are they feeling right now? Where
Everything stopped.
Right.
All concert activity, yeah.
And which also meant the income stopped.
Yeah.
And, the contracts all had some kind of line that said if something unexpected happens, you won't get payment for saving your time, and learning this music. So I really saw the gaps and the cracks. And I said, gosh, I really wish I could do something. So I called a few people, and one of the people I called was Sam Bodkin, the founder of Groupmuse, because Sam was always, his whole mission was to support artists. And I really saw that. The whole founders, the three founders, all really wanted to support artists. And I called him, and I remember kind of laying out the whole premise. I really think we should do this. I really think we need to jump in now because now is the time. People will remember what people do in this time, and we can't be on the wrong side of this.
Yeah.
He said, "F yeah," and I'm
So
censoring myself.
you were the prime mover of this. I mean, you were the
Well, no, I think the nonprofit was already in motion, but
Okay.
what was going to be its mission wasn't clear yet, and so I contributed some of that pathfinding energy. And after we pulled together some incredible board members to help found this really from ground up, I'm really, really proud to say now, having completed 4 years of this nonprofit, we've raised almost $500,000,
That's amazing.
and it's really a testament to, first of all, the Groupmuse house concert community, because without that kind of a community, we wouldn't have raised over $90,000 that fall.
So this is coming from Groupmuse attendees from
Exactly.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And the way that these two entities work together is that the nonprofit fundraises, and there are certain programs that Groupmuse has that are really charitable. We can't really make a company any profit. Groupmuse does it because it serves the musicians, not because it benefits its profit and loss statement, right? So essentially what then the Groupmuse Foundation does is it fundraises and then pays for a lot of those charitable services. For example, Groupmuse guarantees that musicians will not make under a certain number for performing a house concert.
And that's huge for a type of event that is ticketed, right? You don't know how many people are going to walk through the door.
Well, actually, it's not ticketed.
It's not ticketed.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, that's the other way that Groupmuse is different from events around town is you don't pay up front. There is a lot more risk for musicians because what people do is they pay a little bit to reserve their seat and make sure that, that this is a way to reduce no-shows.
Okay.
Because if it's free, if I'm kind of not feeling it and I want to just stay at home.
Gotcha. It's some kind of financial commitment so that they get to the door.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And then once you're there, because generally the environment is so inclusive, warm, usually I like to use the word magic, it's very magical as well for an attendee who's not used to this. They'll often think, wow, okay, the host has just asked and invited me to give of something to the musician in front of me. I was moved by X amount. I think I'd like to move a certain number of dollar bills to that bowl that's being passed around. Now, this is not a traditional model for paying musicians, but it's effective. But as I said, there's a lot of risk for that musician. Will I get enough to cover, my round trip subway? No, that you can.
But sometimes you can't take a subway to get to some of the, there's some places you have to, take a car, or it's, freezing outside and you can't walk,
for the sake of your
15
instrument.
blocks, from the stop. So you might need to hail a cab or something. But
yeah.
So what you're saying is the foundation covers that minimum so that any artist going in and performing knows they're not going to make below X.
Yeah.
Okay.
And every year, before the pandemic, it was a mere $50 per person, up to maybe 5 musicians. And I did have to draw from it maybe a few times, and I really appreciated that program because I don't know if Groupmuse had to do that. It's really a benefit for musicians. After the pandemic, thanks to the Groupmuse Foundation's efforts and really identifying, well, we got to bump it up. We're doing online concerts. People still need to mitigate their financial risk. We doubled it. It was $100.
Oh, wow.
During the pandemic. And then we were very conservative about whether or not to increase it. We increased it to $125 per person. And it's rare that someone has to, draw from this fund, but it's there when they need to. And this is my MO in life, is to reduce financial risk for artists.
That's a very admirable MO and something that's much needed, I think, in the classical world and the arts world in general, but in music world. So touching on the subject of challenges for musicians, what challenges do you think that particularly young musicians face today, and what could they maybe use Groupmuse, or how could they use Groupmuse as a way to support them, or a way to overcome some of those challenges?
Gosh, the challenges list is really long, right? But I'll name a few that I ran into because I can't speak for everyone. One, my financial position after undergrad was not great. Like I mentioned earlier, I needed to play Groupmuses to cover that final couple $100. So if you had to choose between working a part-time job, I don't know.
Being a barista.
Yeah, exactly. That takes you away from your instrument, and you're exhausted probably from standing all day. And that's why I have a lot of appreciation for people who work in hospitality and, at the late hours, because I couldn't do that. I really had to be selective, and I was fortunate to have found Groupmuse because just by playing, I think at most, when I first moved to New York, I might have been playing one Groupmuse a week at a certain point,
Really?
Yeah. And for, $100, $200, if you do the math correctly with how many people you're playing with and which hosts you're partnering with, you can make a decent amount. It's supplemental income, certainly. It's not going to pay your rent.
Sure.
But That's
But it saves
number
you
one.
from, and I say save in the sense that just that a musician who's practicing to be professional, it's unrealistic to expect them to go and work an 8-hour shift somewhere to get those same $100 or couple $100 that they
Yeah.
could get from a performance where they're implementing what they're practicing.
Exactly. You have to understand yourself and say, well, what should I be using my time for, right? So that's one. Two, maybe not enough opportunities sometimes come through, and instead of waiting and kind of who's going to call me for a gig, I found it beautiful that Groupmuse just allowed me to contact nearby hosts. I would message them and say, hey, I have a program. At one point I had like a plant-themed program where, I pitched it directly at people who had yards and gardens.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah,
I like
because
that.
I really wanted to do a program that had flower pots, and there were, flower-themed pieces
Wow.
that I
Yeah.
knew.
I think there's even I think you played it as a Sarayahu piece, Petals.
Yeah, exactly. That was one
Okay.
of them. And so, I really loved experimenting with programs. And I don't know, some of these concert halls are not going to take me in, right? I was a nobody. I didn't submit my proposals to the right people. I wouldn't have known how to get a foot into those venues.
And
But
it's often mysterious. I mean,
Yeah.
I've done plenty of cold writing to people and never gotten replies, or maybe a thanks for your email, we'll consider it, something like that. But it's to be able to go onto a website and just snap your fingers and create something yourself. That's really cool.
Yeah, you can
Yeah.
run something that you're playing with. Let's say, another thing is if you don't really have an ensemble yet, you're kind of trying out a couple people, are you wanting to do a string quartet? Are you creating a different instrumentation ensemble? Like, you can test run how every person reacts in a pressure situation and a live performance by just, hey, I have a group muse next month. What do you think about putting together something? And you really can test the limits here, right? What's the minimum number of rehearsals this person can handle?
Yeah.
What are the maximum number of rehearsals? And then one last thing that I'll say on a personal note is meeting people can be a challenge. Like I think I feel like meeting non-musicians is so healthy for me.
Totally. No, same. Absolutely same here.
It's not that
Yeah.
I don't love my musician friends. It's that if we were all, if you only socialize with the people
It
in your
becomes
work,
an echo chamber. Yeah. Really, and so all we have to talk about is, what's reverberating in that echo chamber. And so you've got to open the door sometimes and let other voices
Exactly.
in.
And so I had the pleasure of meeting someone in San Francisco who would later become my husband.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Wonderful. Wonderful. And you met at a Groupmuse?
Exactly.
I didn't know that. That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
So I owe my now little family of 3 to Groupmuse.
That's beautiful. So being a mom, but also being the executive director of the Groupmuse Foundation, and I think you also mentioned earlier that you are doing some work at Juilliard as an artist administrator.
Yeah, for the Center for Creative Technology there. Yeah.
Okay. And it's so much, it's a lot to handle. And being a mom alone is a huge job. How do you grapple with all of this?
I don't know how, actually. If anyone else can tell me, I'm open. I've always wanted to be a mom. And that's the one thing that I was not going to sacrifice for my career. And I've been very, very fortunate to work with teams, with teams that really understand that and respect it. I could not be a mom and balance these 2 part-time jobs if it were not for my colleagues, were it not for the support of the board of the Groupmuse Foundation. Our board chair will often step in if I'm wrangling with, a very squirmy, wormy little girl. And then, of course, on the other part-time job at Juilliard, many of that team also are parents. And so they all understand. They've gone through it too, more recently or not as recently. And I feel like being a parent is sometimes a bit invisible. We're supposed to hide that part of ourselves. And I think the culture is shifting more and more. And I'm really grateful for that, because in the beginning, I actually thought it was possible to have Zoom meetings with my daughter. I would be breastfeeding, she'd be out of the view. And I kind of miss that because she's now so active as a toddler. She will make her presence known to everyone on that Zoom now. And so I'm really grateful to have a lot of friends supporting. Actually, a mutual friend of ours, Christine, will come and just help me hold her so I can do the 5 errands I've put off all day before I have to go send off, 5 emails. So it really, that phrase, it takes a village, in New York, it is true to the 100th degree. So yeah, again, so grateful. And I am really, really loving being a mom.
Well, she's adorable. You showed me a few pictures, and I'm sure every year that goes by, it'll just become more and more fun. But well, I really appreciate your being here, and I want to kind of wrap things up. But I'm just want to ask you a couple quick questions, which maybe you don't have an immediate answer to, but from the kind of bird's eye point of view that you're in, if you could change one thing about, or if you could inspire a shift in the classical music world at the snap of your fingers, what do you think would be something that musicians would benefit from most, or something that you see as a problem or an obstacle to overcome?
I think one obstacle is the world trying to put us all into boxes. What I mean by that, one angle is, I remember asking myself, do I identify as an arts administrator or am I a musician? And I think the answer now is, I don't need to choose. My daily work as the director of Groupmuse Foundation is informed by my lived experience as a musician. I can say things like, I never want us to do this to a musician. Just because it's being done doesn't mean we have to. I don't accept the status quo. That kind of phrase is important to me because I've been on the other side of certain policies, of certain decisions being made that impact musician pay directly. And I want to work on shifting the idea that it's always institutions versus musicians.
Yeah, it's kind of a versus one versus the other idea, versus no pun intended, being collectively involved or on the same team. And that's partly one of the things that I wanted to illuminate with this show, is to talk to people who are in positions where it's less about being in one box versus the other, but who have combined experiences both as performers, as administrators, and how those are intertwined. Okay, so the last question, because I know you have to get back to a squirmy daughter, but there's a tradition that I've tried to continue on this podcast, which is to ask of the guest to pose a question to the audience that might make them think more about music. It can be about what we've discussed. It can be about anything. Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Something they might be able to reply to in the comments.
The question I would probably pose would be, how can you bring silence next time you're performing? If you are an audience member generally, how do you use silence in your body to prepare yourself for a concert that you're listening to? And if you work for an arts organization, how can you introduce silence as an opportunity for rest and recovery? Because this work can feel very thankless at times, and it can feel underappreciated. But there have been so many moments in my experience as working behind a desk now, not on stage, where I felt like I'm where I'm supposed to be.
Well, thank you very much, Mosa, for that very profound question. And thank you for coming. It's been very enlightening and I appreciate you making the time.
Thanks, Sean Henry, and thanks for the tea.
Sure thing. Sure thing.